Whoa. The seventh episode of WandaVision was actually really intense, and I'm gonna have to issue a spoiler alert warning here for this Watch Companion episode because I actually somewhat disagree with some of the people who are a lot smarter than I am when it comes to the various comic book backstories that feed into the Wandaverse, if you will. I want to address three things in this Watch Companion episode. First, I obviously want to talk about the colors and spectrums of colors. Yeah. Secondly, I want to talk about Pietro, and I'll just call him Pietro for clarity purposes here. We obviously know that it's not Pietro really. Finally, I want to talk about why I do not think it's Agatha. I'm not buying it. Now, I don't think I'm blowing anyone's mind when I say that this episode was all about colors, right? However, I do think that some people are trying to force it into a binary discussion of reds and blues. Obviously, Wanda's magical spectrum color is red. It's been that way. We've known it that way for a long time. Ever since, she was like, "You took everything from me." That came across a lot more evil than I wanted it to. We know that the Wanda spectrum is red, and what I found interesting was in the scene where she's panning around the room that's glitching, right? You have the blues there and everything as well. When it comes to the stork, though, the stork glitches for like a second, and then you get this immediate puff of pure red smoke, right? Probably the purest moment of magic in that entire scene. And that indicates to me that we're still very much supposed to think that the twins are connected with Wanda's magic, right? That sort of protects them from, I think, the rest of the story arc. So what we said in previous episodes about the twins, that there's something about them that's maybe outside of the magic of the hex, I think that still holds true here. In terms of the other magical spectrum here, blue, right? I see people connecting blue magic with Agatha, and I think that that's setting us up for potentially disappointment later on. The blue magic spectrum that I think we need to focus in on is the one that Monica sees when she pushes her way through the hex. Monica gets through the hex, and then immediately we see her eyes with a rather, I don't want to say baby blue, but maybe it's powder blue kind of color of spectrum. And when she looks around and she sort of sees the matrix around her, right, the makings of this entire Westview world, it reminded me of back in the day when you would get the 3D glasses and they were made up of a red film and a blue film. And if you looked at the page without the glasses on, you'd see that the red and the blue lines were not connected. They would usually run like parallel to each other. But when you put the glasses on, they would converge and you would get this 3D image. So, is that the case going on here, that in reality, the Westview world is being created by a connection between this Wanda's red magical spectrum and this blue magical spectrum? And if so, who is providing that blue spectrum? It's not Agatha. Now, I'll come back to the colors in a little bit toward the end here. I want to actually transition from Monica reflecting the blue magical spectrum right into the discussion of Pietro here. And again, I know it's not really Pietro, but I've heard some people talk about how Pietro's wearing of blue at the end indicates that he is in some way connected with Agatha. And I don't think that's the case, really. And here's why. Again, Monica is an interesting figure because she seems to be reflecting whatever magical spectrum is immediately in front of her, right? When she opens up the cellar door, her eyes are not blue. What are they? Well, let me speak to your 5-year-old self for a second. What color do we get when we mix red and blue? Purple. Agatha's magic right? That spectrum, if you really pause it and look at it, is quite purple in nature, which raises the question, if the WandaVerse is actually created, or if Westview is actually created using the red and the blue spectrum of magic, is it providing a space from which this purple magical spectrum can exist? I think if Pietro had been an evil character, I think that Monica would have reflected that kind of magic back at him. I actually think that Pietro's blue clothing at the end is an indication that he's not a part of the whatever evil cohort is happening here. In fact, I think Pietro, or whoever it is going to end up being an integral character in getting Wanda back into reality. And that takes me to Agatha and the whole fun montage of openings where it says, "It's all Agatha." Nope, I'm not buying it. And here's why. The key scene for me is this. Two things, actually. One is just the basic study of narrative in general will tell you that a chaotic universe and the use of an unreliable narrator will usually continue to be chaotic and unreliable throughout the entirety of its life. And the Westview world is still very much in existence. So, Agatha here seems to be just kind of, again, another disruptive force, something to take our minds away from what's really going on here. If you look at the scene where Billy and Tommy are on the couch with Agnes, right, or Agatha, you'll notice a couple of things. Two things. One, when Billy is petting the rabbit, he says, kind of, "I like the rabbit because he's quiet." He then turns to Agnes and says, "You're quiet on the inside." That can mean two things to us. It can either mean that Billy is seeing that Agnes is hiding something, which would be Agatha Harkness, right? Or it could also be that Billy is seeing, "You're quiet like everyone else here," meaning that something is pulling the strings behind Agnes still. And who is that? Well, there's been a lot of talk of a lot of different characters here. It brings me to the color spectrum again. If you look at Billy's shirt, you will very clearly see the red indicating Wanda's magical spectrum. You also see that powder blue spectrum as well, which indicates someone, but I think it's something benevolent. And then you have the color above that, which looks similar to kind of Agnes's clothing or Agnes's spectrum of magic, but not really. It doesn't seem purple enough. And then you look at Tommy, and you realize Tommy is wearing a lot of green. Now, a search online for the character Nightmare will show you two basic colors that tend to get attached to Nightmare. One is green, and one is that deep purple. So, it very much could be that Nightmare is actually still running this entire show through Agatha. And I do think it's a possibility that Agatha is also trapped here and not the main villain. That would be, I think, an interesting way to go with this episode. I could see them actually doing that, honestly. Well, let me know in the comments below, right? Do you agree with the idea that Pietro may not be an actual villain here, or the Pietro character is not a villain? Do you think it's possible that someone else, if not Nightmare, someone else is actually running the show through Agatha? Or do you think that it really is just Agatha Harkness who's doing all of this? I'm curious. I want to know what you think. And you could also just let me know if you're still enjoying the series.